So just a quick overview as to what Solarisbank Talks is. This kicked off last year. Like I said, the first session was in November, but it's a quarterly session where we basically want to grow together with the community, right? But then give back as well. So the whole point is we will keep communicating this through Solarisbank Talks. The next session will be in the next quarter, but it's open to fintechies, product enthusiasts, obviously, and everyone else, right? And this gives us a platform to interact on fintech topics. But then again, if you have topics or even things to discuss, feel free to reach out as well. Now, I will, like I said in the beginning, I think it's 05, 06 now, perfect. I will jump into the panel discussion, right? I'd like to give, first of all, a quick introduction to myself. I am Emmanuel Aqua, or Money for short. I joined Solarisbank in April, and I work with the infrastructure teams here at Solarisbank. And for those of you who might not know what Solarisbank is, we are a tech company with a banking license. So what we do is we provide APIs for our clients and offer banking as a service as our core offering. I think Jens will probably give us a bit more. He's part of the panel and he's from Solarisbank. So without much ado, one thing I know for sure is, and maybe the rule of conduct for moderation is usually the moderator, which would be myself for the session, and I'm host as well. So I'll be freestyling a lot, but just saying the moderator usually introduces the panelists, but I actually believe it's a lot better for panelists to introduce themselves. So like I said, without further ado, I'll hand over to Christian. Please introduce yourself and then give us a general gist as to why you're here, like your background, and as well as finleap Connect. You're mute actually.
Yeah, thank you then for having me today. My name is Christian Hüning. I'm now the Director of Cloud Technologies at finleap Connect. I started at the company actually back in 2018 when it was Figo. And as probably some of you know, Figo and FinReach merged, and then we formed finleap Connect out of it. And I graduated basically through the ranks a bit and went up from back in 2018, where we started out as a newly formed platform team to rebuild the infrastructure from what it was back then to what it is today, and then transformed this into the finleap Cloud solution that we have today that hosts all our solutions at finleap Connect. finleap Connect being the company basically providing an open banking solution that is based on multi-banking and German and European-based connectivity, and then adding value-added services on top of that. So the finleap Cloud is the underlying technology and foundation for all of these services. And of course, as the company we also own a PSD2 license and have especially to adhere to those regulatory requirements in our infrastructure and cloud hosting environments. And I guess that's why it's interesting to discuss this today.
Thanks, Christian. I'll hand over to Taneisha as well. If you can also give us a quick introduction to yourself and a brief overview as to what orderbird does.
So hi everyone, Taneisha Mitchell here. I'm hearing our feedback. Taneisha Mitchell here, engineering manager at orderbird. What we do, we are well, our product is a point-of-sale solution that's hosted on Apple devices. We are fully in the cloud. Been with orderbird a little over 2 years. My team is both the DevOps engineer team as well as the in-house system admin team. And as you could tell, we're not quite into the fintech journey, but we do have a couple of third-party providers that we work with in that space. That's it for me.
Okay. Jens,
yeah. Then I take over. My name is Jens Herrmann. Hello. I'm working for Solarisbank as Principal SRE Engineer. I actually joined Solarisbank fairly early in 2016. and was already involved in the platform team back then to build the infrastructure first in our own data center on-premise, and have it grow and scale until we decided in 2018 around to go and migrate over to the cloud. And since then I have worked with the team to do the migration, and since a year now I'm in a newly formed SRE team at Solarisbank to cover this part of the thing as well.
Thanks, Jens. Thanks, everyone. Taneisha, Christian. And as like we said, this is a fintech journey into the cloud. And pinging off of what even Taneisha just said, right? And I hear there were hints as to where we all currently stand in the cloud. Taneisha, you said you're fully in the cloud, right? It would be nice to have a gist of what that means for you and what that transition was like for orderbird.
So a little over 3 or 4 years ago, there was a DDoS attack, and it lasted 2 seasons almost. Our customers were offline in 2 different times for longer than a week. And the powers that be at that time, they did a survey, sat down and researched what was out there, where they could go. So previously, it was more private cloud kind of setup. And the decision was made to go with AWS, primarily because they were the most mature at the time in this space. What was the second part of the question?
Oh, good. It was about what the transition looked like as well.
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure what it looked like then, but what I can say is they did as much as possible to automate majority of the process. So it wasn't a ClickOps approach. If we need to spin up our environment anywhere else, we have the ability to do that.
I think, Jörg, can you please mute your mic? I think Jörg, I think that's a Jörg V. Is it muted? Okay, I think it's better now. Sorry, go ahead, Taneisha.
Yeah, so the transition was done a little over 3 years ago. Majority of the processes were all automated. So if it's a case that we need to pick up and move somewhere else, we have the ability to do that.
Okay, thanks, Taneisha. And I could hear from these introductions as well. Like you said, fully in the cloud, but I could hear the other side of it. And I think, Christian, it would be nice to hear where you currently stand in terms of cloud.
Yeah, we are. So we are not what you would probably call in the cloud, in the sense that we are not with a hyperscaler. So in 2018 at Figo, we were hosting in a private data center in Frankfurt, based on a rather traditional approach, based on VMs and bare metal plus VMs with OpenStack. And back then it was decided that we wanted to transform that into something that is more lightweight in the sense of spinning up and scaling out. And we then looked at Kubernetes. Naturally, at the time, it was the thing that people went for, and that's when we were brought in. So I joined the company, and I put some other people with me, and we did look at how can we modernize this. And our way was more that we didn't really go into the cloud using AWS or GCP or any of these providers with their proprietary functions. So it was not a classical lift and shift in that sense that we used the proprietary solutions that were there, but we rather looked at how can we stay in the private data centers, but transform the solution that we had, the hosting solution, but also the way that we work into something that we refer to as cloud native, or more cloud native stack plus DevOps practices, and bring that to the teams. And that's basically then what we did over the course of, I would say, yeah, it was basically a 1-year transition all in all, to move from that OpenStack-based solution to a fully Kubernetes-based, all containerized solution, and also modernize the app stack and just bring this all into production and migrate all the workloads from the old solution to the new one.
Okay, I'll actually come back to that because it's like we just discussed, it's almost in stark contrast to how orderbird is set up, right? And it'll be good to hear how it is for Jens as well at Solarisbank.
Yeah, actually, we were quite lucky that we originally started with Solarisbank in a containerized and microservice setup. And originally in our on-prem system, we had a cluster of Nomad scheduled servers, and we're already trying to use the kind of cloud native way, but we're really limited by the possibilities of our data center provider. That was really painful that it took several days to get new hardware provisioned. And well, hardware, those were already virtual machines that we then put our software stack on. And so essentially the migration to AWS in the end was not very much about adapting our stack, because this was already with the containerization and so on, fairly adapted to a cloud environment. But it helped us tremendously to really be quicker and faster with new resources to put up. And so the biggest part of the migration, actually, I think from the time-wise, the longest were the legal requirements until all the contracts were signed and lost on a plane and found somewhere else, and all that stuff. And the actual technical changes that were necessary were more on the infrastructure level to set up all the networking in a secure way and so on. But the actual software was fairly similar, fairly simple to migrate.
Okay. One common, I guess, denominator I hear here is the cloud agnostic tooling. But then it's also critical to see how that applied to the final state, right? So for example, Jens, like you just mentioned, it was cloud agnostic containerization. And in moving to AWS, if we still retain being cloud agnostic, or do we move more towards cloud dependency? And it'll be similar for following into what Christian said and Taneisha as well.
Yeah, so I can start. So actually, our software stack is cloud agnostic. It's running in containers, talking via HTTP, so no big surprise there. But we also realize that if we go to the cloud, we will be locked in anyway, at least with IAM and the whole infrastructure setup. And seeing this, we decided to go all in and use all the features that are available at AWS. So we're at AWS. And didn't maintain our own Kubernetes, for example, but instead really used the offerings of AWS with Fargate, ECS, and the whole cluster management from this. And so we went all in with AWS for the moment.
Okay, thanks, Jens. What do you think? I think Taneisha unmuted. And it would be nice to hear if you had a similar stance or you're on the opposite side of the fence.
Yeah, so I do agree a lot with what Ian said. We ended up going with getting locked in with a lot of AWS's services. So it wasn't just about using EC2 instances or VMs. If you do decide, let's say, to use Kubernetes, then would you prefer to be hosting Kubernetes on some VMs, or would you prefer to have it in EKS, where majority of the underlying stuff like your operating system, your memory, stuff like that is managed? I think it takes away some of the stress of worrying about having to do batch management when you take that road. So like Jens, we are locked into using some of the resources. But again, thanks to automation tools, it makes your life easy if you need to transition to something else. Like, gone are the days when it would take you months to move from one setup to another. Now it's a matter of days.
And now I'm actually really interested to hear what Christian says in this regard, regarding being cloud agnostic and either retaining or losing it with cloud.
Well, we made the decision to base ourselves on Kubernetes, basically completely. So all our stuff runs on Kubernetes, also databases, which is kind of the holy grail, if you will. If you read Twitter and things, there's always these questions: who runs databases? Who's stupid enough to do that? Well, we are. It's actually working quite well for us. So we decided to base on Kubernetes. So the assumption here is that everywhere where we can run Kubernetes, we can run our stack, and we can also run that basically mostly automated, roll it out, then also roll out the application stack on that. And this is due to a relatively relentless approach that we took in the beginning towards a complete GitOps design, that everything has to go through a pipeline. And also the approach that everything can be restarted at all the times. And I think that was basically the most upfront work to get this working in all the places, with the databases, changing the application to work with different databases than before with distributed databases, and then getting this to be true for all the applications and for all the bits and pieces, including the hardware nodes, and also the operating systems. So we're now at a system where on the hardware layer, if we want to update a node on operating system, we just reboot it, and it then pulls in the newest version. We're currently using Flatcar from the Kinfold guys as a successor to Container Linux. So I agree, and of course this is if you want a downside, this is a bit more work than if AWS takes care of that for you. But on the other hand, with the approach we chose, it's relatively painless in that you can simply roll through your cluster. And we reached a level, I'm glad to say, where we do not have to announce maintenance windows or downtimes or anything. We can just do that. So a kernel update or something like that doesn't bother us at all. It's also automated. We have an operator in Kubernetes that we just tell, hey, reboot the whole thing, and it will run for 3 days or something, and then all the nodes are updated and fresh. So that's the setup. So in that sense, to the question, I would say yes, we are cloud agnostic. We can run this on a Kubernetes cluster wherever we can get a Kubernetes cluster.
I actually have a follow-up for Christian. So sorry, Manny, to take over.
Please take over. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, please go ahead.
So, so you're managing all the physical equipment and stuff like that. Aren't you concerned about wear and tear? Like, let's say a whole rack goes down. What does that look like?
Yeah, so we are not exactly managing the physical infrastructure. That's what we have our service provider for. That's the part that is handled by remote hands. And of course, this was part of the challenge upfront, this making the deal and getting the contracts in place. So we ended up having basically spare hardware for all the node types. We have 3 basic node types: storage, compute, and a special type of compute that has local disks. And if any of that breaks, they can just replace that with pre-assembled hardware that is sitting there, right there, next to the shelf. The whole setup is distributed across 3 data centers. That's maybe interesting to say. So that's in Frankfurt across 3 DCs that are interconnected. It's one large cluster spanning 3 DCs. So roughly the equivalent of what you get when you have a regional cluster at the GKE, for instance. So that's also quite nice in terms of redundancy. If something breaks, we usually don't notice. So for instance, they also handle the network equipment, switch updates. And if they do switch upgrades through the network topology we have, they can just do that, switch by switch, and we don't notice. I mean, we see, of course, that the switch goes offline and comes back, but on the application layer, it doesn't matter. So to your question, they would have to break down a lot of things at the same time in different locations, actually, to really put us under stress.
Christian, I have a question. How many people are you maintaining this stack?
It's me and my team, composed of 5 people. So all in all, we are 6.
Okay, and how, well, I don't know, big is the software that you're running, or how many developers are working on the on the software at the moment?
The developer count is something I can't pull out of the head. I would say roughly, what do we have, 30 or something, I guess. I'm not entirely sure. I think so. The software stack is relatively large. We have several different deployments of stacks. Overall, we run 4,500 pods and over 10,000 containers on the infra, and that's yeah, as I said, 3 different stacks, each having, like, the largest one has probably 30 different services. Use database wise. So there's also another interesting discussion that is in the fact that Kubernetes is meant or is considered to be painful to operate. Actually, I felt that in the past month, we didn't really care about Kubernetes anymore. We didn't really care about the underlying infrastructure anymore. What we are caring most about is the developer relationship and the developer story, and how can we make it compliant with proper control of who get access to what, and at the same time agile and fast to develop with and to iterate over. That's the thing that's basically mostly what we're concerned with in the past month.
Okay.
I think that would be your biggest challenge if you should move to the cloud, like sorting out the permissions that people have.
Yeah, I don't know, how do you do it? I mean, we basically say you don't get any permission on the production system. You can just view things, of course, not the contents, but just what's there and is it operating and behaving well. Then we have another role for people that do on-call. They can do a bit more. They can delete pods so that they restart if anything is required, but everything else goes straight through GitOps. I would be interested to learn how you guys do this.
Yeah, it's actually very similar. I mean, of course, we're using the AWS resources for this. We're having IAM roles defined that is connected to our single sign-on. And with this, we have a lot of different roles. With restricted production access, obviously, also distinguish between view and read. To say so, more people are allowed to see what's running in our infrastructure than the actual data that is saved there, of course. And very few people really have production access in a way that can be changed. Yeah, we don't call it GitOps, but of course we have infrastructure as code as well. So changes to the environment are only done via Terraform.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the same on our side. AWS a couple months ago came out with IAM service accounts, which is pretty cool. The most you'll need to do is set up your roles and provide access to roles. Once you attach those to your users, then whatever it's linked to within your cluster, that's the only thing that they'll get access to. So it's just one point you need to configure your permissions, which is pretty awesome.
And what's your team size, if I may ask? Like we are 6 guys or people. What's your team sizes?
So DevOps team is only 3. And yeah, we maintain a customer base of a little over 10,000. Yeah, somewhere in that region. But the team is pretty small.
Yeah, our cloud and platform team has 9 members now currently, but is grown kind of bit over the last time. But okay, the whole company is growing. So.
And how many environments do you have? Like with those 9 people?
Excuse me again. What?
And how many environments or things, clusters, app stacks do you maintain with those 9 people?
Well, it depends how you cut and slice it. So we make a very specific distinction between what we call stages, like a testing stage and a sandbox stage and so on. Of those, we have 4, which are mostly really identical pieces of infrastructure. The actual software stack is more or less one stack, but inside this we have, maybe 200 services.
Actually, this part of the conversation is pretty interesting because then it's clarifying what the team dynamics look like, right, across the different, the setups in different companies. one thing I find out is it seems that heavily influences how you set up, right? For example, Christian, I hear with the setup you have now, you interface a lot with the product teams, but then I think your DevOps principle means really least privilege, right? And that means you guys handle everything infrastructure related and the teams don't do much, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, and it will be trying to figure out what that looks like in orderbird, right? And in Solarisbank as well. How much leverage do teams actually have? And do they have control over the infrastructure as well?
So at Orderbird, for the most part, it's the DevOps team that's responsible for the infrastructure across the different teams. And it varies the types of services that they actually use. So whilst we're in the process of moving our core solution, our flagship solution into a Kubernetes type of environment, we're still maintaining in EC2 instances and stuff like that. But outside of that, though, yeah, we control the build out of the different environments. But of late, we've been doing our best to enable other teams to really get their hands in the mud with playing around with their own environments as well.
So you do allow them to access the Kubernetes clusters or the underlying stuff and actually change that, or?
Well, for the most part, they're not so interested in it.
Yeah, we find that as well.
Yeah, they just want to know how to deploy to the cluster. Okay. They're fine. How to update their Docker images and the likes. Outside of that, they're not interested in knowing how the infrastructure works.
Okay, that's actually interesting because we are more or less in the process of introducing something what we call you build it, you own it. Maybe you've heard the term. And this is a mixed bag somehow. So I totally agree. There are a lot of developers that are only interested in developing their software and creating a Docker container and then just have it run somewhere. But also we actually want to have our developers own their services and also own their resources that they're using in AWS. So essentially, the infrastructure team and the TechOps team, bigger TechOps environment, provides a lot of services in a way and provides a lot of templates like Terraform modules and stuff that can be used by the development teams. But we actually do expect that the teams then own their actual environment that the software is running in. So they have all their own Terraform repositories. They have their own AWS accounts, actually. So we have, I don't know how many, a lot of different AWS accounts. So more or less each team has their own. And they use the Terraform codes or modules that are provided by the infrastructure teams, and the whole networking setup and sharing of VPCs and stuff. This is done centrally, but the actual clusters where the services are running in are officially owned by the teams, and this works well, more or less. There are some teams that are more enthusiastic than others, but all in all, we kind of expect them to know what their Terraform code is doing, actually.
Do you have a common compliance story on top of all of that? Or how does that work? Like you say, okay, you have these knobs that you can change, but you can't change some fundamental things that we need to assure that are in place.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So this is also there's a whole monitoring infrastructure from our security team. Everything that is done in our setup is monitored and logged, and there are alerts on it. And somebody gets so from time to time somebody gets a hint. So what are you doing there? We have this as an external monitoring structure, but essentially everybody is allowed to at least try out stuff by themselves. There's also, again, our staging, our stages setup coming into place, because we can allow much more in our testing environment than we are in our production environment. And we have enough steps in between to make sure that there's no stuff going into production that's not supposed to be there.
Yeah, what we do is we have a separation. We have two clusters. One is the dev cluster and one is the production cluster. And as I said, on production, you don't have any access to change anything except through a 4-eyes principal secured pipeline that is pull-based also. And for CI/CD and also storing our code and organizing all these things, we use GitLab. That was a decision made also in 2018. And what we have in place for the dev teams is that GitLab is having a special integration with the Kubernetes cluster that is custom made. I think most of it can be done now directly with GitLab these days, as they also added the Kubernetes integration. But what you basically get is that for every group and project you have, you get a namespace in the dev cluster, and whoever is in that group and or project, based on the access role in that group, they get also access in the Kubernetes cluster. So by that, we have a kind of self-managed development environment. And the devs then in those development environments can do basically anything within a namespace. They can play around and then optimize their applications and configure that for production. And then through some Helm charts and some pipelines, then configure the production environment. What we found is that we also kind of introduced the you build it, you own it principle into our DevOps culture. And we had varying degrees. Some people said, okay, it's running, cool. What can I do to make it as solid as possible, or what is the bare minimum that I should do? And we also found that people that are doing it for longer now, that have a stable way of working with it, they also started to get interest in the more detailed ways that Kubernetes provides you to optimize your applications. Various things like auto-scaling, using special distribution features, traffic shaping, whatever. So there's various things that we see that some people are getting interested in. That is actually quite nice, as it showed us over time that the infrastructure got out of the way, kind of, and people started using it in more creative ways to optimize the applications for the cloud native stack. We see that mostly also in the deployment frequency, where we really are now at something between 40 to 50 deploys to production per week, which overall for the whole flow, given that it's still all within certain boundaries, I think is a really good value. So that's the relationship. The only touchy thingy here, and I guess that's where you guys have it a bit simpler, is that we also run our own databases. So we use MongoDB and we use CockroachDB as the SQL database. And that's always a point where I think that's where dev and ops really meet, because there's parts of that clearly on our side where they can't do things like storage stuff and those items. But there's also other things that they, of course, can then control and set up and optimize.
Okay. I think as I can see clear benefits from your current setup, right? But then again, from what Taneisha said from before, right? Moving to AWS, in terms of that maintenance aspect of it, like you said, databases and stuff, the cost benefit analysis, maybe from what Taneisha said, with offloading the heap of your worries, for example, to AWS, might outweigh in that regard. And I would like to hear maybe the other benefits you see, or you'd seen, Taneisha, from moving to AWS.
Other benefits apart from not worrying about the underlying
Yeah, there might be, for example, maybe cost, because I guess the cloud is supposed to provide that flexible cost in that regard, if there's any benefit at all. And
well, the cost aspect is kind of tricky. It can get away from you in a big way. I think the biggest selling point for me where the cloud is concerned is they're all competing, Google, Amazon, and Azure, and they're all trying as best as possible to bring the cost down. The next part is they're constantly churning out new features or improving some of their resources. So I find that with the cloud, you have access to cutting edge technology versus when it's something that's self-maintained, it's harder to move as fast as these big companies. So that's the biggest plus for me. Cost-wise, it can get away from you, and you have to constantly be keeping watch of what these new solutions are that they're coming up with, because oftentimes, especially with AWS, what happens is they will push out a new feature or a new resource or service, and the service that you're using all of a sudden is way more expensive than this new resource. So then you have to spend the time to understand how this solution works, how to move into that space to then, of course, cut costs. So that's the cool part for me, the fact that they're constantly churning out new solutions, new services. Cost, though, you have to keep your eye on that one.
Nice. I
That's
mean,
definitely an experience that we made as well. So while we were migrating last year, we also onboarded several big customers where we already knew that those will increase the traffic and then will increase the volume that we have to handle in our system. And where we, to be honest, really didn't look at the money. So we scaled what was necessary and had big clusters running, and we're doing load tests on a separate cluster, and we're scaling this up as well, very big. And the experience is you have to really look out for the cost. That's definitely different to an on-premise system where you more or less you have your upcoming cost or the upfront cost, but then it's just running and it's constantly running, and there doesn't additionally come additional cost on top of it. And in the cloud, you really have to watch out and be careful to scale down what you maybe scaled up for something, or else you will be surprised. Yes.
Or else. Yeah, actually, that's an interesting question, the cost one. As Jens said, we have, and I think I didn't mention that, we have a bare metal system. So we don't have any hypervisor or anything else. We just have the metal, so the bare hardware, and on top of that, we run container Linux or Flatcar, and then directly Kubernetes. So that cuts out a whole level of complexity on the one hand. It requires knowledge about the some low-level stuff like BGP, like networking, like how to set the stuff up. I think here it's really crucial to have a great team that I'm gifted with. I can say that also on the various levels of required expertise. So we have people that really are deep down into Linux and the hardware stuff, as well as people that excel at development. So that's probably also kind of a unique situation that we have this mix. Maybe I'm not sure how many people teams have that. But cost-wise, it's interesting that we of course have this bare metal setup right now, and it's fixed, as Jens said. So that means that we need to utilize it in the best possible way, and it's relatively slow in changing that. And that's currently a struggle we have, that if we want to add hardware, that's a couple of weeks to get new hardware because it's actually real hardware. And of course, to lose the hardware is also relatively hard in the setup right now. That's why we are working towards a new solution where we can scale up and down by the hour. There's ways to do that. One thing we are looking at is Equinix Metal that was formerly Packet. So that's something we're looking into, whether this is useful or other ways to scale up things. There's also the Metal Stack that's been developed by people from, I think, Munich, jointly together with the Finanzinformatik folks to operate hardware stacks in a way that allows you to add and remove hardware in an automated way. That then gives you kind of the same scalability up and down, also cost-wise, as you have it on AWS. Of course, it's not by the minute, it's still hardware, but at least it's not you have a 3-year contract and that's it.
Okay, it is like I said, the different backgrounds really tell a story, right? Especially like we've already seen with Christian. I guess maybe the attraction to the cloud, for example, currently a bit better, you're happy there, right? Everything works as should. And then Taneisha being in the cloud a bit longer than Solarisbank as well, right? And then the different approaches from a potentially maybe a DevOps culture or whatever the relationship with the product teams look like as well, and really heavily influences the way maybe access management is done too. But one thing maybe we haven't really touched on, we might touch on a bit lightly before we wrap up, is from a business context, right? One thing is in terms of the shift more towards cloud, and how the influence from business was. For example, Christian staying within bare metal, if there was any shift towards cloud at all. Taneisha, maybe I'll start with you in terms of if it was more from a business decision as well, looking at cost, what about flexibility, and what the impact has been on business too.
So, like I said during the introduction, the shift to the cloud was coming from an event. There was a DDoS attack, well, multiple over 2 seasons. So at the CTO at the time decided that, okay, let's look at what our options are. We're definitely not going private cloud again because yeah, we got shafted. So they went with AWS because it was more mature. As it relates to the business side, of course, for business, we're down, our customers aren't happy. So if this is our option and you're telling us that it should offer us the possibility of not experiencing this again on this scale, then okay, let's run with it. So for the business, it was easy. Customers aren't happy. Let's make the customers happy.
Okay, so I get it. So basically, the promise of AWS to give you a really high availability outweighed maybe let's say business didn't look so much at cost. Is that what you say, maybe? Or they kind of tweaking sometimes?
It goes hand in hand. At the
Yeah.
time, the fact that the customers aren't happy, you know how the profits go. You start losing customers. But at the same time, it's like, okay, there's a trade-off we need to make here. It might be somewhat more cost effective to stay on private cloud, but if we'll have to spend the time understanding what security may look like, both physically and virtually for these private clouds. There is what AWS is offering. And we go with the idea that they're fully secure from a physical standpoint. The rest is then on us to ensure that as a product development team, we're taking all the necessary steps to ensure that the infrastructure and our solution is safe. So from the business perspective, cost, we're not thinking about it right now. We need to make sure our customers are happy. Move to the cloud. Move to the cloud, but then as a team, we ensure that we're not overspending because it can get away from you in a big way. It can be a surprise at times. You leave something running, you thought, yeah, they say 720 hours and it will cost me, let's say, $1 per hour. Okay, let it run. No, there are small things that add up and you don't realize until you get the bill.
Okay, thanks, Taneisha. I'll ping maybe quickly to Christian as well, and then TNs to wrap up regarding this angle as well. Like, Christian?
Yeah, business-wise, so it was a bit of a tough decision because back then we also had to cope with in 2018 with the PSD2 coming up, and there was the struggle between that old infra that was running into limitations and also was, if I remember correctly, quite costly. I wasn't involved on that side back then that much, but it was a tough project that had to be executed in a tight, constrained timeline, and I think it helped that most of the applications were already Dockerized, and so that we brought up the knowledge on how to run private cloud Kubernetes already. So we could basically just roll this solution out, solve some issues, or specialties and get the compliance story working. And that probably then in the remainder of the thing was the main discussion point together with the actual migration of the old solution to the new one. So timeline-wise, for instance, we started roughly in summer of 2018 with the first ideation stuff, and then in April 1st, 2019, the first customer went live on the new infra. So that was the timeline. And between then and April, we had to modernize the application. We had to switch databases, and we had to design the complete migration flow and clarify the compliance bits. So that's how that went. It was a tough time, but it was also a very rewarding thing when then in September 2019, we migrated the last customer to that infra. And by that time, the team was very well aligned, dev and ops teams, they all worked nicely together. And I think business-wise, it allowed us since then to have a far more stable product, move faster, and deliver with more confidence, basically. It sounds a bit buzzwordy, but we did the numbers, and if you look at that, it's really like that, actually. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. You're, I'm not, as a moderator, I can't be partial. When you said buzzword, I was laughing and I tried to shut my mouth, but all good. I'll ping over to Jens then to wrap up, and then we can go into the interactive session.
Actually, the moving faster part that you just said, Christian, was probably the biggest reason why we went into the cloud, because we really realized that with our setup that we had before with our on-premise data center, it wasn't really possible to scale as much as we expected to scale. And there we definitely saw a better solution in the cloud to give up the flexibility to really quickly scale up, add new resources as necessary, and also quickly try out new stuff, what wouldn't have been possible before.
Nice, thank you, Jens. Wow, that time flew really quickly. And then I just had to check the clock and then wrap up really quickly. I had maybe 2 extra questions. However, I think we had an amazing panel, hence why the discussion flowed well. Definitely wasn't the moderator. But just a quick round to say thank you. Now we move into the interactive session. I mean, still, actually, there are 2 new questions in the chat. I'll just continue this that I can ping out. And like I said in the beginning, they are in the chat. The whole point is because it's interactive, I'll just call on you so you can ask the question to the panelists directly. It makes a lot more sense. I don't know if Hima is still around, actually, because I know Hima had to jump out. Hima had to leave, yeah. Okay. I think Dennis said, it looks like you stood up for Hima, so if you can ask Hima's question. And
I think that was already partwise answered by Christian about the actual effort that is required to keep up Kubernetes. And Christian already said that you're 5 or 6 people in your team. So from that perspective, I would consider this unless someone else has like follow-up questions as answered. But there are other questions in the chat, I think, afterwards.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. That is actually the answer to that question, right? And it's also maybe a part of it would be in how much of the resources of the 6 people in the team that has to do with maintenance. I mean, that might also be interesting, but
yeah, I mean, maybe just quickly, we also use Terraform to roll out Kubernetes, and we just kept updating it. So and we, Kubernetes itself isn't really the thing that we are concerned with the most of the time. It's stuff on top, basically. So basic Kubernetes maintenance, I would say from the team 1 to 2 people, and the 2 people was when there were tough times. It got simpler over time.
There is one follow-up question though, Christian, that I would have, and that was when you were just talking about the team and that you were operating 10,000 nodes, if I'm not mistaken, or
containers.
Containers, sorry.
So, yeah.
Do you measure performance, and do
yes.
you see? Okay. And what is your assessment? Like, how does your setup impact the overall performance of these containers that you operate?
They are working quite well. The overall thing you find is that within the whole space, having a densely packed cluster that is relatively small but runs a lot of things, so actually utilizes the space you have on these nodes, is something not that usual. So we are also using a Linkerd as a service mesh, and they did a survey and they found that most people, so the average is a 10-node cluster with 50 pods. And so that's the average across their users. And that's quite interesting in the sense that if you do more, you run into issues sometimes. But that's mostly solved by adjusting the defaults at some solutions. So Prometheus instances grow large if you do monitoring. Some other default resource limits are not sufficient, and you have to ramp them up and accommodate or automate that away with pod nannies and stuff. Other than that, it's working just nicely. So there's no performance impediment with having these 10,000 containers. It's more like that. At some point in time, you would have to add nodes because you need more containers. And actually, the other interesting thing is you get less CPU or memory resource constraints, but rather you can run into something that I would call a process constraint, or something where you just have too many things trying to do too many things in parallel on a single node. And that's what you have to manage more, which is kind of difficult to explain sometimes to people why you need another node or why this is a problem, because it's not, yes, CPU is expected or memory is exhausted.
Yeah, thanks for that, Christian. Then I hope that answers your question, Dennis. If I'm guessing, yeah, you look happy. That's good. I'll move on to the next question then from Arian. Arian, could you please read out the question?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome.
It's more directed towards Jens, because well, they have a banking license, but did the regulatory requirements pose a big impediment for you to move to AWS?
So for orderbird, not so much, based on the region that we operate within. So since we're using the EU Central region, we're already covered for GDPR. We don't hold any sensitive data, so we're not being held as tightly to some of the compliances that Solarisbank might be held to. So Jens could actually speak to that part.
Actually, I have not been involved in the contractual negotiations between Solarisbank and AWS, but I've seen them from the outside, and they took about a year to get everything ready, that Solarisbank was ready to actually put production data into AWS. So it was kind of a lengthy process. On the other hand, apparently we are the first, at least German bank, that fully goes into AWS. I mean, we are currently kind of advertising with this. So we kind of put some groundwork in there. And we definitely found that we get a lot of support from AWS with really accommodating our needs. So you don't really feel this in the day-to-day technical work. Probably there are other teams at Solarisbank who has been more involved in this. But yes, it took some time, but somehow we got it covered.
I do have a follow-up question though. So Solarisbank, you guys must have gone through Pci Dss Compliance. Either Emmanuel or Jens, probably you can speak to what that process might have looked like, and how is AWS compliant with those requirements for Pci Dss Compliance?
Yes, we actually, we are not, because we are issuers of cards. We are not merchants.
Okay.
That makes indeed for PCI compliance a big difference, because in the end, it's losing our own money when something goes wrong, and not that of other people, like customers of merchants and so on. But we are currently in the process of doing it anyway. We do need it for some product. That's, again, I'm not completely into all the products that we are offering. So it's a bit not as simple as it seems in the first place. So actually it was not really necessary from the very beginning. And now we're currently in the process, but I have no deeper insights into this.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Also, I'm the moderator, so I can't answer questions. Just saying, but Jens pretty much covered it regarding that. I think Mario also, I should have done this in the beginning. And normally with interactive sessions, when someone's asking a question, it's nice if they introduce themselves just briefly, right? So maybe I'll take this last question before we try out spatial chat. I think Mario, you have a question in there. I think is Mario there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, please.
I cannot see whether I see you or not.
We see you and we hear you.
Okay. Now I found the button. With BaFin regulations on outsourcing and all that stuff, if you went to AWS as a bank, how did you make sure that external auditors like those of BaFin, in the case they want to get access to the physical data center, wherever that is?
Yes, that's actually kind of a funny story. So this was also a very lengthy process. I also have not been directly involved in this, so this is more on an anecdotal level. But apparently there was, at some point, it was thought to found a German Verein between several banks, and I think Deutsche Börse had been involved as well, to cover this in a bigger group, this requirement against AWS, and this somehow failed. And I think in the end, what came out of it is that AWS now offers workshops that you can apply to for a really, really, really big amount of money, where you can actually go to AWS and get shown around their data centers and have workshops around and have people assigned to you that explain everything. And apparently that's the way how they figured this out.
Yeah, I can add to that. That's basically the thing. You have two types of possible audits. So there's a group audit where you can go more into the soft part of it, and there's also the possibility to get an annual on-site visit for a price. So you have to pay yearly a five-figure number, at least that's what I know, to visit on-site for a number of days or 1 day or whatever it is.
So in order to make sure that in a case of questions by auditors of BaFin, you have to be part of that association, Verein, whatever, so that they could, in case they want to, they ask for, by regulation, they have the right to do so, and you have to make sure that they can get into.
Maybe I could jump in here. Hi, this is Dennis. I'm also working at Solarisbank.
Hi, Dennis.
AWS offers a variety of programs that you can take part in order to take part in those group audits that they conduct there. If BaFin or Bundesbank or your internal or your external revision wants to visit AWS, as far as I know, if you pay a very large amount of money, you can just ask them for an appointment, and then they will make an appointment only with you. or you can be part of one of these audit groups. And when you're a part of these audit groups, they happen, I think, once per quarter or something. So usually this is something where you can come to an agreement then with the regulators at what point in time they can go through the regular audit sessions then with them. And it's always, I mean, when you're going to the cloud, we make this experience with AWS, and I assume that also with other hyperscalers, this might be the case. They are usually very supportive. So they understand that if you're a financial institution that is also under revision and of regulators, then you have certain requirements, and they really try to help you mitigate and come up to the requirements that are expressed by the regulators.
Thanks, Dennis, for wrapping that up. I think that covered your. Thanks, Mario, for that question. I think
yes, it did. Yeah.
Awesome. But honestly, thanks a lot. I think we're just a bit over time, a couple of minutes, but I think that thanks so much to Jens, Taneisha, Christian. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I hope everyone else did too. And I'm looking forward to doing this again.